Red Bull just dropped their 2026 livery in Detroit, and honestly, I'm still processing what I'm seeing here. After literal years of the same navy blue matte look that we could all recognize from a mile away, they've gone glossy again with this blue and black jacquard pattern thing, and the whole reveal was peak Red Bull chaos, with Martin Sanka ripping the cover off from a stunt plane because of course they did. But here's what actually matters beyond the paint job. This is the RB22. The first car running their in-house Ford partnership engine, which is the biggest technical gamble this team has taken in 2 decades. Ben Hodgkinson, their powertrain boss, just casually mentioned they hired 700 people in 4 years to build this thing from scratch. 700. That's not a department, that's a small town. And now, Max Verstappen and rookie Isaac Hadjar have to make it work while everyone's watching to see if Red Bull can actually pull off being an engine manufacturer. Look, the whole glossy blue thing is fun for Instagram, but what's actually wild is watching Red Bull do exactly what they swore they'd never have to do. Back when they were winning everything with Renault engines, then Honda, they were the chassis kings, the aero wizards, the team that could take someone else's power unit and just make it work better than anyone else through pure setup genius and Adrian Newey magic. They never needed to be engine people because they were too busy being better at everything else. But then 2026 happened on the regulation calendar. Honda decided Aston Martin looked prettier, and suddenly Red Bull was staring down the barrel of either buying customer engines like some midfield team, or doing the absolutely unhinged thing, becoming a power unit manufacturer from zero. And they picked unhinged, because of course they did. What Hodgkinson said about 700 people isn't just a hiring spree, it's a complete identity shift. You don't just hire engineers, you hire the culture that makes engines work. You're competing against Mercedes, Ferrari, Renault, manufacturers who've been doing this since your parents were young. Honda, who just left you, has been building engines since 1964. And Red Bull Powertrains? They've been doing it since, checks notes, last Tuesday. The Ford badge helps with the optics, sure, and probably with some technical collaboration. But let's be real about what this is. Red Bull looked at the 2026 regs, saw the 50-50 power split between combustion and electric, saw active aero replacing their setup advantage, and realized their entire competitive edge was about to get regulated into a coin flip. So instead of hoping to buy their way through it, they're gambling that starting fresh with people who've never been told, "That's not how we do it here," might actually be the move. And now Max, who's been pretty vocal about his frustration with how 2025 went, gets to be the test pilot for whether that gamble pays off. No pressure or anything. What Red Bull isn't saying out loud, but what's screaming between every line of this Detroit launch, is that they're trying to rules lawyer their way out of a corner they painted themselves into. And honestly, I kind of respect the audacity, even if the logic is absolutely bonkers. Think about what actually happened here. Red Bull spent 20 years being the team that didn't need to care about engines. They had Renault, they had Honda, and their entire brand was built on give us your power unit and we'll outdevelop everyone else on the chassis side. That was the whole identity. Adrian Newey could make a lawnmower engine competitive if you bolted it to the right aero package. They were the team that proved you didn't need to be a manufacturer to win championships. You just need to be smarter than everyone else at setup and strategy. But then the 2026 regulations got written, and someone at Red Bull apparently read the fine print and had a full panic attack. Because these new rules aren't just about making the cars lighter or adding active aero. They're about fundamentally destroying the advantage that setup wizardry used to give you. When the aero is active and everyone's wings are moving the same way under the same conditions, and when the power unit is doing 50% of the work through electrical deployment that's heavily regulated, what's left to outdevelop? You can't set up your way out of a bad engine anymore. You can't Newey your way past a power deficit when half the power is coming from a battery that everyone has the same rules about. So Red Bull looked at that future and realized they were about to become just another customer team, hoping their engine supplier felt generous that year. And for a team whose entire psychological warfare strategy is built on, we're better than you at everything, that was apparently unacceptable. They'd rather spend ungodly amounts of money hiring 700 people and building an engine from scratch than admit they might need to depend on someone else's charity. But here's where it gets properly weird. They're not just building an engine, They're building an engine for regulations that nobody's actually raced under yet. Every other manufacturer has decades of institutional knowledge about what works and what explodes. They've got the scar tissue from previous regulation changes. They know which shortcuts look good on paper but grenade themselves at Monza. Red Bull Powertrains has none of that. They've got smart people and a blank sheet of paper, which Hodgkinson spun as an advantage, but let's be honest about what that really means. They're guessing. Educated guessing with a massive budget, but still guessing. And the Ford partnership, that's not technical salvation, that's branding insurance. Ford gets to slap their badge on an F1 car and pretend they're back in the game without actually having to build anything. And Red Bull gets to tell sponsors, look, we're partnered with an American automotive giant instead of we're a drinks company trying to build engines in our spare time. It's genius marketing dressed up as engineering collaboration. The real question isn't whether this livery looks good or whether 700 people is enough. The question is whether Red Bull genuinely believes they can outdevelop Mercedes and Ferrari on power units within 2 years, or whether this whole thing is an elaborate bluff to force the FIA into giving them some kind of newcomer advantage in the regulations. Because if you're Red Bull and you just spent 4 years building this program, you're absolutely going to lobby for concessions that help new manufacturers catch up. You're going to make noise about how unfair it is that legacy teams have decades of data. You're going to position yourself as the scrappy underdog even though you're owned by a multinational beverage corporation. And Max Verstappen gets to drive the science experiment while everyone watches to see if confidence can substitute for experience. Should be a fun season. So where does that leave us? Honestly, I think Red Bull just committed to the most expensive ego trip in modern F1 history, and I'm weirdly here for it. They looked at becoming a customer team, said absolutely not, and decided to speed run a 60-year engineering learning curve because admitting dependency was apparently worse than risking complete humiliation. That's not strategy, that's pride with a 700-person budget. Here's my bet. The RB22 is going to be an absolute mess in preseason testing. Not catastrophically bad, but inconsistent enough that everyone starts writing think pieces about Red Bull's hubris. They'll have reliability gremlins that Mercedes and Ferrari haven't seen in a decade because those teams already made these mistakes in 2014. Max will do Max things and drag it to a few podiums early on through pure talent, but by Monaco, we're going to see cracks. The question isn't whether they'll struggle, it's whether they can develop fast enough to matter by mid-season when the points actually get serious. But if you want to watch this whole beautiful disaster unfold in real time, you need to actually stay plugged in because the drama is going to move fast and the PR spin will be legendary. So do yourself a favor and subscribe, because when this thing either becomes the greatest comeback story in F1 or the most expensive faceplant in motorsport history, you're going to want to have seen it coming. Don't be the person who missed the chaos because you were waiting for highlights. Now, here's what I actually want to know. If the RB22 is still struggling by Canada, does Max start publicly questioning the decision to go in-house, or does he stay loyal and blame the learning curve? Drop your prediction below.